Hi guys.
Aloha.
How is everyone today?
Great. How are you?
Oh, just wonderful. Hi Dawn, how are you?
Doing good. Sorry about that. I'm in the kitchen doing stuff as this is.
No worries. I've been loving all your photos on social media, all the stuff that you're sharing. Looks like
Good.
you're enjoying the beach often.
Yeah, we go. The one great thing about this shutdown is that we started a habit of every day from about 6 to 7:30 walking the beach,
Nice.
picking up glass and trash and stuff like that.
Hi there.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Christine, how are you? Hi, Gina. Nice to meet you.
Hi,
Dawn.
aloha. How are you?
Aloha. Christine, I've just made you co-host so that you should be able to share your screen. Gina, do you need to be sharing? Will you be sharing any screen, or you're just
No.
Okay.
I'm just the commentary. I'm the van.
Can't wait.
I just get to interview
I'm the
Gina.
van.
I'm going to interview her the whole time. That's really what's going to go on here.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear.
Yeah.
Lisa, I love your background. Where is that? So cute.
I don't even know where it is.
It looks like it's in Carmel, California.
We're going to have to make something up.
In my living room, sorry.
So, yeah, the trees move though, which is pretty cool. Like if you watch the tree, like over there at the bottom of it, you'll see it move around. It's kind of like
nice.
Outside. Hi, Christine.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, just lovely.
Good. So I think we're waiting for people to come on, but I'll probably just give you like the quick intro and then you guys are good to go.
Yeah.
I actually didn't receive, Cheryl, did you get, normally Latasha usually sends me the registration list. I didn't get that.
Oh, let me go look for that.
Okay.
I shall look and be back.
Cool. Thank you. Hi, Beth.
How are you? Thank you so much for doing these. I've enjoyed it so much.
I'm so glad. I know you've been on every one, I think, right?
I know. I'm loving it.
Good.
Yeah.
I love it.
Lisa, while I have you on the line there, I'm looking for one of those spaces in Connie Street. Who's the best person to call over at should I call Grant or should I call somebody else?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
I already tried Brandon, but he didn't call me back yet.
I'm thinking who we worked with on that.
Yeah, just text me if you think on.
Who else is there? Okay, it's not Grant. I don't think it was Grant. It was somebody else.
Brandon is the guy that I call, but then there's also that not Chad. Is it Chad?
I'll find out who it is. Let me ask her.
Thank you so much.
And then we'll talk later about, I left you that my lengthy voicemail the other day.
Okay.
Catch up on that too.
Yes, please do.
I had to show you guys this. I don't know if I showed this to you. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. So I have this on my, this is my screensaver. Hang on. Can you see it's a raccoon?
Yeah.
This is my
So wash your hands.
mascot for the official mascot of the pandemic, the coronavirus. He wears a mask and washes his hands.
Cute.
Whatever. I know. I liked it. I thought it was funny. I like raccoons. I've always wanted to have a pet raccoon. I don't know if that will happen.
Have you ever lived anywhere where you actually have raccoons?
I did, right, California. Yeah, I was born in California, so we had raccoons, and periodically, I guess, we would see them, but I love them. I haven't seen them in a long time. It's been like 18 years or something.
Yeah.
Were you, well, you were in Nevada and California, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Mississippi though, and I remember the raccoons always used to, they used to trash stuff. And then I know in California, they used to get like where my surfboard and my outdoor sauna was, and they always made a mess. And I was just like, they are rascals, man.
They are, I know. And they call them like, you know, trash pandas or whatever. And they, although I see, you know, once in a while, like, and now we have Facebook, you can see they're the pets, the ones that they domesticate, they're just, I mean, how, it doesn't get any cuter than that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know some people are grossed out by them. The other thing though, that I don't miss that we don't have here that we have in California were skunks, right?
Yeah,
like everywhere.
Skunks, snakes, and bears. Yeah. Like you don't, there's no, you don't feel like your life is threatened if you go hiking. So like,
right,
like that. I appreciate
mountain lions.
Yeah, right.
I do miss squirrels though. I like squirrels are cute. I know they're kind of, people say they're like rabid, but I think they're cute.
Yeah, they are.
One time, I know we're waiting for people to get on so we can keep talking about animals for a second. I was in New York and this is an animal experience, walking around Alphabet City. This was like, I don't even know how many years ago, a long time ago. And it was the first time I was ever there. And I was walking around and there's like a park and I saw out of the corner of my eye, it was nighttime. And so there's like lights, you know, shining down so you can kind of see the pathways and the walkways. It's dark, and then I saw an animal like come into my view and it was pretty big, you know, and I was like, oh, what is that? Like a little dog? It looked like a little dog. And I was like, oh, look, an animal, you know, and of course I'm like, I'm going to get closer. And oh gosh. So I get closer. It was seriously a giant rat. It was a giant, like huge, like looked like, it really looked like a small dog. I'm not kidding. And that was the first time I ever saw a giant rat. So
That's nasty.
there you go. You got to be careful. You got to be careful over there.
Got to be careful for the rats. It's good information there.
You don't want to pet those.
Oh, no.
It's all part of living in different places. I know some people lived in like, you know, who live in Florida and stuff that I've never dealt with, like
the alligators.
That whole thing.
They see like the alligators, they go on a run and there's alligators everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal to them. I'm like, what? Like that seems like life threatening. Like that seems like
I know.
Run the other way.
They're like, oh, a gator, whatever. All right, let's see. We've got about 30 seconds more or so, and then we'll just kind of get started. And this is our second to last shift, I think, right? Isn't this number 11?
Yep, this is number
11. Oh my gosh,
11.
we've been doing this for 11 weeks in a row. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And cool. Okay, so we're still, okay, still waiting. We're on early. Oh, okay. So yeah, Anne's asking about the handout. So Cheryl, I know, went to go send me the roster. And Cheryl, are you back?
I am. I'll upload that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It was sent earlier, but I'm happy to upload it and send it.
Yeah, we'll just do that a couple times as people log on so they make sure that they get the handout with the slides. Okay. I am going to go ahead and introduce, and we'll have more people that'll come on, I'm sure. So super excited about today's session. Of course, the topic is in general distressed property, which can mean different things depending on the situation. Obviously, we have a distressed property sheet that defines what a distressed property is, and I can let Christine and Gina talk a little bit more about that if that's in the content. But when I saw that that was the topic with short sales, foreclosures, REOs, the first person that I thought of as we looked at having guests on was Gina Duncan, because Gina, who some of you know is also a great friend of mine, is a very successful agent on Maui, who really, when we had the last market shift, was one of really only about 3 or 4 agents, Gina, I would say, on the whole island that took off with the distressed property. And you know, keep in mind that the whole purpose of this conversation is so that all of you who are on the call today really can get educated about that and learn best practices about what people have done, because ultimately the goal is to help. And we want to, and we know that based on the circumstances that we're seeing today, we can expect that we're going to start to see a lot more distressed properties come back, right? Because of obviously just the normal market shift. And I'm sure you guys will speak to this more, with the pandemic and all the things that are happen economically and people losing their jobs, we would expect that we're going to see some of this. So I think today is really valuable to increase your skill set and see what somebody like Gina, who was incredibly successful just in general as an agent in her business, and then, like I said, a huge portion, and Gina, you can speak to how much of your business ended up being in the distressed property arena during the last cycle. So first person I thought of, you know, connected with her right away. She said yes. And then Christine came into the picture because Christine, also, you had a lot of experience personally as well working with distressed properties on your team and through the last market shift and cycle. So I think the combination of you two ladies is super dynamic and can offer so much value in addition to the great content that we have today, just in terms of your experience. So really looking forward to this. And with that said, Christine, I'll let you take it away and get us going.
Hey, awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And as Lisa had mentioned, I started my career in Vegas during the last market shift. So that was super exciting because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So I actually was a buyer's agent on an REO team. So I got to see firsthand the back end of stuff. And then I also got into short sales because the more I was in the REO realm of things, the more I knew that there was more that I could do as an agent. And so I was super excited to get connected with Gina because we talked, and small world, we know a lot of the same people in Vegas, at least my old broker, and that was exciting. And we have a lot of the same best practices. So we're excited to share that with you. Having said that, the Tactic 11 is actually supposed to be 3 classes. And we're turning it into 1. So this may be like standing in front of a fire hydrant for you guys. The intention for today is to share with you guys the best practices that we have seen, that we've done in our own businesses, to see if the REO market or a short sale market, which one might work best for your personality. So there are some handouts. There should be 3 handouts that came over. So if you don't have 3 handouts, maybe pop in the chat and then we can make sure that they're uploaded to you. But just a quick question for you guys. Who was around during the last shift? Like, who actually had their license during the last shift? We're trying to get a gauge of the experience level here. Lisa was. Okay, awesome. Yep. So it seems like we have a handful that were around, and then it seems like, who's newer and never really experienced a shift at this point? All right, so hopefully you guys have had a little bit of experience with this, but we're gonna get started to share with you the things that we feel like would be best for you guys to learn through this process. So first and foremost, consult with your brokers, right? Anything that we're doing with REOs, anything that we're doing with short sales, there's all these other professionals that we need to be talking to. Number 1, we're always talking to our brokers. Number 2, you know, CPAs, financial advisors, attorneys are really great. And Gina and I were both big advocates of this, that we had mentors when we first got into this realm of business to learn the ropes, because when we get into distressed sales, we are dealing with people that are really stressed out and they need really good advice. And you can't wing this. You can't wing this type of stuff. You need to make sure that you are the fiduciary and giving them the best advice possible. So Gina, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I would just say that get educated, not only, I had a partner who is very progressive, and so there were no mentors at the time that we started doing short sales. So we had to be educated, and we took coursework in distressed properties before we even attempted to do one. So definitely I applaud everyone on this call for getting the education that you will need to start into this realm if you so choose. So congratulations for attending today. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And there's tons of designations you can go after and research. Just make sure that it is, they have track records of success at this point. And so you guys, everybody can see my slides, right? Just want to check in. All right, if you guys can't see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so the main things that we're going to talk about today is we're going to go over the distressed property timeline. We're going to evaluate current shifts and what the state of our national economy is, and then Gina's going to update us on some of the local stuff we've seen. We're going to go over listing REOs and if that might be right for you, listing short sales and everything that entails, working with buyers with distressed properties, and then see if any of those are a good fit for you so you can survive and thrive through this shift. So first and foremost, listing REOs. Let's just go ahead and jump right into the content. So there's a handful of reasons people can be distressed, right? So you can have a personal shift, you can have the market can shift, and then through all of that, you have like these buyers that pop out of the woodwork. So a personal shift may include having negative equity from a market shift, unemployment, which I think that's probably what we're seeing most right now, other types of issues like medical issues, accidents, and then we also have some consumer confidence stuff. So first and foremost with property shifts that we know with a negative equity, obviously, if market drops and people have mortgages, like let's say someone has a $1,000 or a $100,000 mortgage and value, they just purchased the property and values drop and now their house is worth only $90,000, they don't have a lot of equity. And those are situations where they might, if they get into a financial situation, they'll be upside down and they might not be as committed to staying in their mortgage, right? What we're seeing right now that is different from the last shift, we have probably equally amount of distressed people, but the big thing right now that we're seeing is that people have equity, right? It's not like the housing crisis where before we had this huge negative equity issue because people were using their homes as credit cards, more or less, right? So now what we've seen is that we have about 60% of all Americans actually have equity in their property. And in addition to that, we have about 42% that own their property free and clear. So even if people are missing payments, they would have equity, which may not fall into this negative equity situation, but people maybe that just bought their homes that were laid off, they'll probably be in the negative equity situation, right? So the next role is unemployment, which I think that's the biggest thing that we've seen that has hit our nation and also our local economies. I know here in Kauai, we're definitely hit with that. I'm sure all of our islands, right? Is that what you guys are seeing on Maui, Gina, as well, unemployment?
Yes, we have severe unemployment on Maui right now. We're very much hospitality based and there's not a lot of the hotels are even contemplating opening in June. We're hearing more like July and August for any type of tourism activity. So it's been
yeah, that's what we're kind of hearing here. And it might be longer for us because our mayor's a little conservative with things, but I know. So again, I'm from Vegas and my whole family is in hospitality there. They're getting told it's going to be 2021. So again, these are, those are tourist vacation type of places. So that's definitely where we're going to be hit the hardest with unemployment because we don't have a diversified economy. So even with unemployment, like let's just follow down this rabbit hole. You're laid off. Maybe it's taken a while to get unemployment checks. If you're able to get unemployment checks, your debt to income ratio, you start living off your credit cards. all of those things start making an impact on your financial health, right? And overall, so this is kind of the research that's been done that if you have an unemployment, they're unemployed, there's going to be an increase in delinquencies, which we've already seen, right? But the government's trying to put all these different things in place to make sure that people can still stay in their homes. But as we continue to see debt to increase, and I think we already have a high debt ratio for our country in general, but as debt continues to increase, we may continue to see delinquencies because people are living off their credit cards because they're cash poor at this point because they're unemployed. So the length of unemployment is projected to go further and further. Hopefully not because of coronavirus. Hopefully that stays under control and people can get back to work soon. These are the most recent stats that I was able to pull up that, March was our highest point of unemployment. And as time has gone on, unemployment has gone down. Now, again, we have 3.2 million people still unemployed, but that's some of the better numbers that I've seen. And again, this was the beginning of last month, so I'm sure those numbers are even better now. The biggest thing that we've seen in unemployment and what Gina had mentioned, the hospitality industries, right? Servers, we have 38% of servers unemployed. And even as Gina mentioned, anything with hospitality, with hotels, that we have here on Hawaii everywhere, like that's where we're gonna have the biggest impact. Gina, any other feedback as far as unemployment and ideas of what's going to be going on here in the local markets, or at least there on Maui with unemployment to get things back on track?
It really, right now on Maui, we have an anti-tourism sentiment in our county council and in our government, so that is not going to help in the recovery. However, in the folks that I'm talking to, attorneys and such, they feel like tourism is a state-run enterprise. So as much as the county is saying we want to cut the number of tourists in half, and you see all the headlines in the newspapers, they feel we really should not be as worried maybe as we are about that right now. And also servers, bartenders, typically transient workers in the vacation industry sometimes are not the bulk of our home buyers. So although we might see definitely distressed sales coming about, it would not match the number of, it wouldn't be a direct correlation with the unemployment for that segment.
Okay, and then I know Gina spoke a little bit about this earlier, but we were mentioning, it kind of reminds me, because we're so impacted with the economics here, hopefully Hawaii, we will get a little bit more diversified in our economy moving forward. I know Vegas was highly, like they were really, only tourism was the only economic driver. And one of the things we learned in 9/11, from 9/11 in Vegas, is that we were able to diversify our economy and bring in some tax breaks and larger corporations in order to help offset that economic impact. So I know that Hawaii right now, we are very impacted by this, but my hope is that we learn from this and we're able to diversify our economies and maybe have some type of incentives that we're not so dominant moving forward, that if tourism does stop, because who knows what's going to go on with COVID and how long this will last, hopefully it doesn't have to cease everything. We can be a little bit more diversified.
And I do think consumer confidence is going to play largely into what we see, as well as any treatment and vaccine for the COVID. The sooner we have really solidified the treatment and vaccine and know if indeed we're going to have another wave in the fall, that will raise consumer confidence if it's found that it's not going to be as bad as it was this past time. So
if people feel safe, they'll start traveling again. They feel safe.
They'll start buying, they'll make the big purchases.
Right, of course. We also talked about personal shifts as, divorce, job loss, but also loss of income. And Gina and I were discussing vacation rentals, right? That's a personal crisis that because here the mayors have taken away the ability for vacation owners, people that own properties that have vacation rentals. they actually can't get any income. So that's also a personal crisis. And so that's another thing to keep an eye out for during this market, as far as maybe opportunities to help people. With what is planned for job loss and unemployment, the projections at this point are only 10% of our unemployment would be permanent. So that's kind of good news. And then as far as our projected unemployment, hopefully as states start opening up and we start opening up and people start coming back, this isn't going to be a long-term recession like the last one was. The last recession took 9 years to recover. So that was pretty impactful. And that's where it's more of a housing crisis. It was more of a housing crisis. And I know personally, when I'm talking to clients, I don't use the word recession because I feel like some people have PTSD of the word recession. And so I like to just call it a shift. And, the shift, what the larger companies are projecting at this point is that it's only going to be a couple years until we get back to where we were before. But obviously, we've seen dramatic decreases in our GDP. We've seen dramatic decreases in overall consumer confidence and just the fear factor. So as Gina mentioned, getting kind of back on track is going to help, I think, help all of us with moving forward through this. And there are some people that we have a lot of different sides of the spectrum with all of this, right? Some people don't think that there is a problem. Other people think the sky is falling. There's a variety. So whenever we're talking to our consumers, we always want to make sure that we're validating their feelings and their concerns with stuff. But I always like to bring stats and facts in slides similar to what I'm sharing with you guys. So then they have a better idea, because let's face it, guys, they're getting usually a certain story that is on the news, right? And last time I checked, the news doesn't make all of us have warm and fuzzy feel goods when we walk away from it, right? The news is there. In a lot of cases, it's reporting information that creates fear. And I think, guys, moving forward, we, especially through this, us all to be a resource for our communities, for our sphere of influences, for all of our people that we care about, and make sure that they're getting good information, right? Accurate information, and not going off of what Facebook said or what they saw on the news that maybe is not necessarily relevant to our market. And so again, what I've seen as far as the research that's been done, we should be up and running this next quarter. Now, I don't know about you guys, but we've seen an increase in Kauai of productivity just in the last 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. It seems like things have been loosening up and there's a lot more deals that are getting ready to go on. Gina, are you guys seeing something similar there? Or are you guys still kind of lower on the totem pole's production?
It was really like a tale of two cities over here, depending on what market you're working in. The residential local market stayed pretty strong. We have lack of inventory and people were still purchasing, especially essential workers like teachers, firefighters, people that had their jobs were still purchasing homes. What has stagnated over here are the vacation rentals that are up for sale. Of course, because people can't come to see them, there's not so much buying over the internet as we would like. But definitely in the last week, I'm noticing a shift. I participate in the broker tour meetings, and we're seeing a little bit more activity in the last week.
Good, awesome. Yeah, all the reports I've seen from all around the country, and I know even on the Big Island, the agents that we have over there, what they're reporting is, yeah, in the last, really, the summer months is going to be like what spring usually is for us. So that's what we're hoping, and that's kind of what we're seeing here, that maybe our fall would actually be busy too. So as long as coronavirus kind of stays under wraps and consumer confidence and people feel safe, we'll continue to see our real estate continue to happen through this process.
Well, May was down 70%. So we have to go back up out of that.
A decrease in closings. We had almost a 40% decrease in closings in Kauai, what we saw as far as productivity. So, as we all know, real estate is usually a 60 to 90 day projection out, right? So If we're seeing things starting to pick up now in the beginning of June, later in summer, that's when those numbers should start hitting. So it'll be interesting to see the numbers as the months go on here. So as far as our distressed property timeline, I'm going to default a lot to Gina because she rattled this stuff off like that yesterday when I had questions for her. So she's definitely a pro when it comes to this. So this graphic right here, the distressed property timeline. So as we've mentioned, personal issues that are coming up, the first thing is they're missing their mortgage payments, and then they'll go through this timeline. So what we're going to do, this is kind of that pre-foreclosure process and short sale process. For the REOs, we're going to be focusing on this section here. And so Gina, if you could, and let me go ahead and zoom into this, if you want to share with us a little bit of your insight on this process here that we're seeing as far as this timeline.
So for REOs, what will happen is the lien holder will make a complaint, and then the complaint will seek relief from, you know, the asset, the promissory note. And then once they have filed that complaint, if that goes through, they'll issue a notice of lis pendens, and that notice is filed with the county clerk, and they'll issue a summons to the borrower. And that's typically when we get involved as realtors. We'll have a client call us and say, I received a notice in the mail. What am I gonna do? Hopefully they haven't sat on that notice a week and two and thought about it, because 30 days is a response time, 20 to 30 on those notices. That doesn't mean that they're going to lose their house in 30 days, quite the contrary. It's a long process for REO, so they definitely should talk to an attorney first and foremost. Any one that is in distress should talk to an attorney, and we'll get to the bankruptcy part later. But in an REO situation, talk with an attorney, have the attorney respond for you to the letter. And if you're not contesting, even if in a non-contested foreclosure, sometimes it'll take 6 months for them to get the process through. And even if they tell you, you know, you have to move out of your house, we've had clients that went and moved out of their home, and the bank didn't proceed with their foreclosure for over a year. So don't be in a rush. You know, if you have clients, tell them don't be in a rush to move out necessarily. But once it goes through that process and the homeowner has been evicted, with the cash for keys process, sometimes the bank will hire a list with an agent, and the agent goes out and offers the people, okay, if you get out with, sign the documents and go peaceably and have it broom clean, we can offer you cash to move out. So that often happens. And if they're already out, then that agent works with the asset protection company to get the house ready for marketing. And it's marketed on the MLS as a foreclosure. And then sometimes with these bank foreclosures, the buyers can purchase directly through an agent with a purchase contract. More likely than not, they are going to the auction process. So you have to understand, especially in foreclosures, it's not like in a regular purchase and sale. Once the buyer signs the contract, it is not, even if the bank tells you they're going to accept your offer, until you receive the signed documents back. The seller signs last, and the seller can take another offer right out from under you. So it's not done until the seller signs off, even if they tell you it is. So that's important to know. And then I'm sorry, on your MS9, it's cut off on my screen. So I wanna, okay, there we go. Bank fails FDIC, we're going back. And I skipped a step because there's 2 tracks actually for closure. One track is the bank takes the asset back at auction and does what I stated with the listing with the REO agent. Another is they offer it for auction on the courthouse steps. Typically, you have to have cash or 10% down and prove you have the rest in cash for the confirmation or for the judicial foreclosure on the courthouse steps. And literally, they will stand out in front of the courthouse and say, I have this property, starting bid, and it's just like a regular auction. It's a very interesting process. Now, the person who won at the courthouse is still not necessarily the owner of the property. Within 30 days, they have to have a confirmation hearing in front of a judge. Sometimes those confirmation hearings are on Oahu, even though the property was bid on at the courthouse here in Maui. So if you're representing a client, you have to make sure you know if you're flying over to Oahu to represent them in court and so forth. And at that court hearing, if someone bids 5% higher, they'll give it to someone else. And the bank can come in and outbid. So it's really not over until that confirmation hearing in Hawaii, because we are doing judicial foreclosures at this time. Not too many non-judicials are going through. We can talk about the differences later on that. Hope that helps.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for all that information. So yeah, hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of that process. There's a lot of different steps in between here, and we're going to dive deeper into all of this. So first and foremost, do we all know what REO means? I didn't even stop and ask anybody that.
Where's the chat box? I want to see the answers.
Yeah, you guys just type in, what does REO mean? Yes, Nicole Burns nailed it. Lisa's on it. Yep. Okay, so real estate owned. So pretty much this is post foreclosure. So the bank has repossessed it and has the bank is now the owner, right? And last time I checked, banks don't like being owners of real estate. I mean, that's not really how they make their money, right? They don't like taking back property. They like people to make their mortgage payments. And so as Gina explained, there's a lot of different steps that go into an REO. It's definitely different from, it's a whole other beast, right? And the main thing is we have a corporation that is the seller. And especially if you're, as Gina mentioned, like it's not over until all the documents are signed, because this is a corporation and usually it's the asset manager that is the seller. Like they have the authority from the corporation to sign off on all the legal dockets at this point. So the big difference is you have an institutional seller. Everything's negotiated different. I don't know about you guys here, but I know we even had some platforms, we had to upload offers online through banks. They didn't even want to talk to us anymore. We just had to upload our offers and type in a bunch of key information online. We didn't even get to talk to another human about the property. Because it's already owned and went into foreclosure, if there are HOAs, sometimes the HOAs are in backlog. So there's going to be high HOA liens that are in place that need to be paid off. Gina, do you guys have, there were a lot of REOs here locally, or were most of the REOs that you worked with on the mainland?
No, the REOs were here locally that I worked with. I've been in real estate in Maui since 2005. So
it was local banks that own the REOs?
I'm sorry, banks. Okay, yes. Local banks were very difficult to work with. I did most of my short sale business, I would say more short sale business with local bank over REO, but in general, it was all national banks. It was Bank of America, Ocwen, NationStar, Wells Fargo, all of those banks, Countrywide, those were the top.
Yeah, that's what we saw in Vegas too. And they were in different time zones, which obviously here in Hawaii, there are hours and hours of difference, right?
Yeah.
And then what we also saw is that on top of everything getting processed out of state, because that adds delays, right? We also had to have HUD approval on things. So any of the final HUD-1 stuff needed to be done. And there were always surprises. It was kind of like an adventure. You never really knew what was going to pop up and what they were going to ask. I don't know if you guys experienced this here, but some REOs, they were actually requesting things that were against the law in Nevada. And we had to bring in legal jargon to explain to them that that's not allowed at all. And if we have to get the Attorney General involved, we will, which was always fun conversation.
We also had to educate to them that our closing process was a 3-day. We don't go into someone's office, sign the paper and say, congratulations, you're recorded, here's your key. It's very different from the mainland. We have, you know, we're separated by water. Our recordings are done in Honolulu, and they just couldn't understand why they had to approve a HUD 3 days out from a closing. They didn't like that too much.
It was a lot of education, and it seemed like I was a translator often. I had to translate what banks were saying or doing to the consumer, to the client, right? That it was almost like they were using a lot of different terminology, but you had to kind of bring in this level of understanding because they were so different. So in this slide here, what they have is, because a lot of us are very familiar with the traditional process of a sale, this actually gives you a breakdown of what the REOs look like and how they're different, and then also from the short sales. And so we'll jump in this a little bit more, but mainly with the pricing, the REOs, and Gene and I were talking about this, but the REOs, usually I know on my team in Vegas, what we did is we got a notification to go do a BPO on a property. And so then depending on what we came back for a BPO, and BPO is broker price opinion. So we would go out and we would do that. And then from there, we would maybe get the listing. But sometimes we were just doing BPOs because we were checking other agents' BPOs as well. So the bank would send out notifications that we would run out and do these BPOs in a very short amount of time. We ended up having to do all of the marketing when we were on the REO team. So the REO agent handled all of the marketing. The bank really didn't do any type of marketing. The bank also negotiated different compensation for REO agents. So I know for us, I think we had a 2%. That was the compensation we got for every single listing. And we were one of the top listing agents for Wells Fargo at the time. And they had plenty of REOs that were hitting the market. So we had plenty of volume coming through. And I think because of that, the banks say, oh yeah, well, we'll cut your compensation by 1%, and you get your 2% compensation from that.
Some are 1%, some are down to 1% now. One of my agents does strictly REO, and some of ours are down to 1%. On the selling side, they'll give the buyer side the 2.5 or 2, but they'll cut it down.
This side gets cut. Yeah, they gave, for us, we had the buyer side always got the 3%, or maybe 2.5. It depended on what their ratios were, what the numbers were on the back end. But yeah, it seemed like the listing agents definitely got a decreased amount. Now with their contracts are totally different. So with traditional ones, we have HAR provides the contracts that we write on, right? With bank owned, Gina, did you write offers on HAR and then get addendums that came back, or what was the process for you guys?
Pretty much we were allowed to use the HAR, but then we had to include the bank's addendum. Yeah. Very rarely did they insist the whole transaction was through their paperwork. Yeah, I would say 95% plus was HAR plus their addenda.
That's what we saw too, that we had a lot of those that came back, and then those addendum were like 30 pages long, some of them. And so each bank had their own process and their own documents. And so you had to make sure you read every single line and you were protecting your client's best interest, because there's some squirrely stuff in some of that. And as long as everyone's in the knowing of it, that's where they get to agree to it, right? It's never fun if somebody's signing off on something and they don't realize what they're signing. And then, maybe they thought they can ask for repairs, which you always can ask, but most banks, they usually say that, hey, guess what? This is as is. meaning we're not planning on making any repairs. Now, having said that, Gina, I'm not sure what your experience has been on this, but with Wells Fargo, they were actually really good with making repairs if it was a loan contingency. So if we had mold, roof issues, like as long as the buyer needed it to get a loan, they would make those repairs. Did you see that here in Hawaii?
Typically here, the ones that they would really bend over backwards to do the repairs and help with repairs, if it was a VA. If it's a VA loan, the lender really dialed back on the as is and made those repairs. Otherwise, the market was so on fire here for REO transactions that they typically would not do the repairs.
Yeah.
It was as is, where is, you're buying it just like it is.
Yeah, buy at your own risk, do all your inspections if you want, but we're not paying anything. In Vegas, we had the issue that people were stealing ACs left and right. So we actually could get those repaired because those were loan contingencies, but it was not uncommon 2 days before closing for an AC to disappear. It was a hot mess. But financing, again, you guys are a little bit different, that you would need some type of everything lined up days before for HUD approval. And then again, as we've mentioned, we're dealing with the asset manager of the bank. And in some cases, you're not even talking to them. In Wells, we talked a lot through their online servicing system that we would log in and put in.
I want to step back on the repairs. There's two different situations on the repairs. When you're the agent and you're listing the property and you tell the bank, hey, in order to market this, this is what it's going to take. Like somebody mentioned in the chat box, safety repairs, things of that nature. They would do it at the beginning of the listing with, you know, your trash out company went in and then you sent them the list of repairs. They would do more repairs at the beginning of the listing, but once there was an offer in, it was less cooperation.
Right, yeah, that's what we saw too, mainly because we had already had somewhat inspections done, and as the listing agent, we had provided the opinion on what needed to be done from that perspective, make it marketable, right?
Right.
So some of the benefits for buyers when it comes to the REOs is that, like we mentioned before, the banks aren't into owning property. They usually want to get these off their books, right? And so it's usually priced pretty aggressively to make sure it sells because they want that inventory to turn. They don't want sitting inventory. They're very unemotional. It's just all about the numbers. And with the banks, we always saw that they were going to clear title. And they did a lot of research ahead of time. If they weren't able to clear title, they weren't going to list those properties. So it's almost like they did their research on the back end before they even got to us. So everything was usually cleared up. And if it wasn't with the HOAs or something along those lines, all we had to do is have them look at the prelim. We would run a prelim, send it over to them, and then they would work on cleaning all of that up because they needed clear title to close.
We had a different situation on Maui. We had many banks trying to push onto the MLS titles that were not clear. And our Realtors Association of Maui MLS committee finally had to come out with a fine structure to any agent who was marketing a property that did not have a clear title because it had gotten so bad.
Oh, wow.
So we had the kind of opposite over here as far as that goes. And recently we still had an asset manager trying to push, you know, no, you have to list it, you have to list it. And I told my agent, no, absolutely not. It's against our MLS rules and regulations. We cannot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always funny what they try to tell us what we can do locally. Gina, did you guys have, like, if you had a Wells Fargo listing or a Chase listing, did they provide incentives if the buyer went with the, like a Chase lender or Wells Fargo lender for the loan?
Not blatantly, no. No, okay. They did not.
Yeah. In Vegas, because we were going up against 50 other offers at one time easily, that was kind of the process. We would end up just getting our buyers pre-qualified with that, whatever that loan was. And we knew the listing agent.
Absolutely. If you had a buyer you were helping, it made sense unless the buyer had already, you know, made their relationship with their lender. If it was a Wells Fargo listing, definitely everything you could do to sweeten your offer, you know, by getting them pre-qualified with Wells Fargo would be better.
Yeah, that was a lot of what we saw, that it was like, yeah, that and that's where we had a lot of different relationships with a lot of different lenders to get our buyers in the best situation. So as far as what Gary had predicted, Gary Keller, owner of Keller Williams, he predicted kind of the perfect storm that led into that housing market. So the big thing was making sure that everybody had home ownership. There were a lot of people that owned homes that maybe should not have been owning homes around that time. Lots of aggressive lending. So with that, we had, you guys remember no doc loans? That was really fun, right? That's mild insanity, but that was a big thing, right? In Vegas it was. We had all kinds of people getting no doc loans. They owned multiple houses, probably why Vegas's market crashed more than others. There was issues with some of the giant investors. There was super low interest rates. We had big building boom, like the economic boom. And through all of that, everything was growing, but we had decreased equity because people were pulling money out of their houses left and right because money was so cheap. And so what we saw is we had less buyers, more sellers, home prices falling, people becoming upside down. They stopped making their payments, went into foreclosure, REOs hit the market. That pushed down the markets even more. So you have this downward spiral. Because a lot of our homeowners have equity now, I'm not sure if we'll see this type of market. I know we'll have distressed sellers because they're going to need to sell. They're going to probably be facing foreclosure, but because they have the equity, they should just be listing, right? They should just put their properties on the market. So as far as traditional and REO, any insights you guys have as far as the differences between traditional and REO of what we discussed? All right, we'll just move on then. Okay, so why would you want to add this as far as part of your business as an REO agent? Gina, real quick, would you ever advise someone to become an REO agent, listing agent?
I think if you have it in your heart to really do double of the regular work, or it's not just double the regular work. You have to have, for a short sale especially, you have to have a heart for the people. You are going to really get emotionally involved on a different level than you ever thought you could with your clients. It's very, very rewarding. On the REO side, you have to have like a high C personality. You have to always dot your I's, cross your T's. Everything with that asset manager is spreadsheeted.
Are you guys there? Can you hear me? Gina just cut out a little bit.
I'm here. Yeah,
okay.
She cut out.
We can hear you, Christine.
Okay, awesome. So we'll move on. So mainly with the REOs, and the why I asked Gina this is because you do, like, you're on call like that. Like, you got to be on it, and you got to be, you're the beck and call of the asset manager. So really the reason why to do this though is because you get to expand your skills in so many different ways, and you get to accelerate your business through tough times. And so as we've mentioned, long working days, hard working days. I remember that we used to work from like 8 in the morning to 8 at night. Like, that was not uncommon, because whenever the banks were requesting things, we only had a certain timeline to go out and do it. And you didn't say no, because you wanted to maintain that relationship and keep having those listings come in. And they're not about excuses. It's like a do it now, or why wasn't it done? So you have to really be on it. So with that, one of the biggest things we saw is that once the properties were hitting, like that we knew we were going to be getting a listing, we'd go out, do a BPO, do a little bit of research. We wanted to see if people were in the property or not. One of the big things though, as a listing agent, we had to pay for all the repairs up front. So for instance, if the owner was mad and they trashed the house and they took all the cabinets out, holes are in the wall, AC units are pulled, whatever that looked like, we had to go assess it, kind of put together what we thought needed to take place to get it marketable, because we knew that the majority of the home borrowers at that time needed to get a loan on it. And we had to come up with that money up top. Like we would pay for all of the repairs up front, and then the banks would reimburse us later. So what Gina had shared with me yesterday is that on average, each listing that she took, it was about $5,000 of out-of-pocket costs. So for most of the REO agents, they have to have some type of accounting strength, because I don't know about you guys, I don't want to pay someone and not get paid back. So you have to have that system in place, right? So making sure that you have your reimbursement put in a way that you can get reimbursed back 45 to 90 days. And not all the time did we get 100% reimbursement for things. We also needed to make sure that we were bonded and we had all of our insurances up to date. And we had to submit financials to the banks before we could even be considered as an REO agent. We had to show that we had a bandwidth of liquidity. And I think we had, when we started out, we had to show that we had $20,000 of liquidity. And then we were able to build up to that. But there was a very stringent process to apply to become an REO agent. So as Gina mentioned before, some of the going out, making sure the property's cleaned out, it's in good condition to start marketing. If there were things that needed to be repaired, that we went ahead and submitted, and to make sure that was done before you put it on the market. And then we had to be bonded in Vegas because we had to change the utilities over into our names. So the listing agent had to hold the utilities and make sure that there was ongoing maintenance. So we had relationships with pool people, handymen, and we also had to have people on our team go out and check these properties on a weekly basis so we could report back to the banks. So with the becoming an REO agent, one of the big things is you're able to somewhat control the flow of the properties coming in, and you have to be aware of what's going in your market and what's hitting your market, and then how that's going to impact, because you have to report all of this back to the banks because they want to have an idea of what's going on, right? I remember at one point in Vegas, I was actually giving numbers to Fannie Mae because nobody else was running months of inventory in the Valley on that. And they wanted to know what the months of inventory were so they can figure out how to release their properties accurately, so they can, it's almost like in Vegas what it seemed like, and you guys can tell me if you like witnessed that here in Hawaii. They at some point were restricting their own inventory because they did want to drive prices up. And they were driving them up after the market kind of tanked down. But it seemed like they wanted to keep an eye on that market so they can strategically release certain ones to keep driving the buyer wars, the multiple offer wars, to keep getting the prices going up and up and up. Did you guys experience that at all here in Hawaii?
I don't think so overall, no.
Okay. That's nice, because it was kind of crazy around that time in Vegas. We're like, what are they doing here?
We came out of our distressed market gradually, so it wasn't overnight, like we have to preserve the values and get the prices back up. It very much came down gradually.
Gina, back during the last shift, what was the percentage of distressed properties on the market there in Maui?
Over 50%.
Yeah, we had probably about 80 to 90% in Vegas. So, but yeah, that's a considerable amount to be dealing with, right? So, as far as most of the people that have become REO agents, they've been in the business a long time, or they're actually brand new agents that have hit the market. So what this research shows that Keller Williams did was that a lot of the newer agents became REO agents. So 2 years or less, 24%, 3 to 5 years, 25%. And then we see that, there was like that 6 to 10% area. And then not a lot of seasoned agents were into REO markets to become REO agents. So that was interesting to me. So if you're newer in the business and there is an opportunity, and you have the liquidity and you have your system set up, REO might be a good option for you. So like we've mentioned, making sure that you're staying on top of things as far as the commissions and your compensation, making sure that you're communicating the financial position of the bank and what's going on in the market. you're going to be monitored on a regular basis as far as your performance, and the lenders are going to want you to give them an update on price adjustments moving forward. They don't want, again, if things aren't turning, if they don't get offers in on property, they want to be updated on what's happening, so they need to adjust the price to get that property to move.
Can I speak to the pricing really quickly?
Yeah, for sure.
On some occasions, you would have the agent that was doing the BPO for the bank call you for access and so forth. And, you know, just like we do with appraisers, they have to do their independent valuation, of course, but if you could give them any information about the property that might help them as far as understanding why it's not at a certain price or why it might be at a lower price, that was always a good thing to do, because sometimes the lenders you would submit a BPO, the other person would submit a BPO, they would go with their higher value when they really didn't understand the property. Maybe it was just an exterior BPO. And so you had to fight with the bank for at least 3 months until that BPO aged out and that they wanted to get a new one. So very important that you, when doing your own BPO, you really justified quite a lot if you needed that price in fact to come down.
Yeah, very, very good suggestion there, because yeah, that pricing is very important, and the banks are getting multiple BPOs, and if one of them is off and if it's yours, they're going to wonder what's going on, right? And then as Gina said, you got to fight tooth and nail to have it make sense. So the more that those BPOs come in all together, the better it is for them, the asset manager, to choose that price so the property can get put on the market. Let's see. So as far as one of the things that's in your handout, and one of your handouts in the REO section of your handout, it has a questionnaire if this is really like if this is something that might be a good fit for you in REO market. So there's a couple different areas in your handouts that say that. And on the courses, I've outlined that I've highlighted the course page so you guys can check that out and make sure that you're taking a look if this would be a good fit for your business. And so going into the mindset of BPOs, so there's a huge mindset issue of traditional sellers to distressed sellers and all the parties in between. So the big thing is, from the traditional sale, people are usually eager and positive about buying and selling, right? Like that's a normal market, more or less. With a distressed property, people are very stressed out whether to or how to. And there's a lot of there's a lot of anxiety that seems to build up in order to get the best price or to move forward with transactions. And so for the sellers in traditional markets, they're looking to just get a return on their investment and cash out their equity, where with the sellers on distressed properties are trying to just get whatever they can to escape whatever the crisis looks like. With the buyers on a traditional are just looking for a reasonable price, and the buyers for a distressed property are looking for the best deal, right? Did you guys ever have those buyers that they just weren't even realistic on what they thought they were going to get because it was an REO listing? They wanted to undercut the bank tens of thousands of dollars. So that's kind of the mindset that we face when we're going into a distressed market. With the lenders in a traditional, they're encouraging borrowing, and then in distressed markets, usually the guidelines tighten quite a bit and it gets a little bit harder to get loans. Agents in traditional markets, they're pretty eager to jump in, and you know they'll work their transactions really well. On distressed properties, lots of misinformation, poor communication. I don't know, Gina, if you experienced this, but it seems like sometimes I was doing both the agent's jobs. If I was a listing agent, I was usually helping do the buyer's agent job as well, because people weren't really qualified fully or didn't fully understand the distressed property situation. Is that similar to what you experienced?
We would have conversations before they would put in the offer on what they should expect and what they should be, you know, doing as far as our short sale addendum. And we also put that advice in our realtor remarks on what addenda to include, how many days to give for timelines and so forth to help them out.
Yeah, and really coach a lot of the other agents to just not even make sure they're doing they're working within the realms of what we knew our clients wanted, but helping them coach their clients as well, or directing them back to their brokers to get advice, because there was just a lot of information that needed to be communicated effectively up front.
We had a very good group of people. As Lisa said in the introduction, I was one of maybe 4 that did any type of volume in short sale, and not as much in REO, but also in REO. And the agents here, doesn't matter what company you call them up, I would have their broker ask them to call me for advice. And, you know, as long as their broker was okay with it, I was happy to give it. So there were a lot of agents here that did ask for the advice and did receive it from the people that were doing the majority of the business.
Yeah, awesome. Because you guys were kind of the specialists. I mean, if you were one of 4 like that, you've really niched yourself out in that. So that's awesome that you were able to provide that, because that probably was super helpful for agents during that time. Yeah. And then the transaction process for the traditional sales, this is widely known because this is what the majority of people know, markets like that. As far as the transaction process with the distressed properties, that was pretty new during the shift. So that's kind of one of those things I feel like, I don't know about you, Gina, you've been in the business, you said a while, but because I was a newer agent, I didn't really understand what was going on. I had to learn as quickly as possible. And I was like you, I took a couple different certification classes. I was learning from the people like in other states. There was a team out of Arizona that I was following a lot during that time to figure out the processes and all the systems and get coaching on how to handle things. And I joined a lot of different groups that I was able to ask a lot of different questions, because we were just bumping our heads up against the wall with some of these banks that weren't being very, they weren't really helping very much. It seemed like they were just being much more difficult than it needed to be. So again, there was a lot to be learned. And I think that's where, even during that time, I did come from helping other people, because I was like, you know, I doubt they're going to sit through the 20-hour course I just did last week to learn this stuff. So how can I best communicate? Because above all else, it was to help the client, right? Regardless of the client was the asset manager for the bank that we worked with, or if it was a short sale client, right? So lots of differences there in mindsets as we're moving through a distressed market. So the big thing, the lenders and the asset managers, super stressful. They're managing tons of properties. So you wonder why they're so grumpy if you talk to them, or they don't have time to have a conversation. You got to plug it into a little computer program. It's because they have more than they can handle. They're always looking at the bottom line and numbers. And oftentimes they're getting either moved to different departments, or they're getting moved up or moved sideways, or who knows, fired. They weren't there anymore. So there were a lot of moving parts for the asset managers around that time. And sometimes they needed help and coaching too from agents, as Gina's mentioned, especially with the getting the properties ready to get on the market and help them understand the market and what the local laws and requirements would be. So as we've mentioned before, banks are not in the business of running real estate. Yeah, Ronnie said, asset manager is very humorless and dry. I would say they were miserable humans, most of them that I worked with. I kind of felt sorry for them every day. With the cost crunch, so this is the big thing. This is why what we saw in Vegas is once the short sale process started kind of coming about, we did see a lot of banks try to have the short sale. They wanted the homeowners to push the short sale to go in that direction. The average cost for an REO, and it's probably higher here in Hawaii, but Gina, you might have some insight on this, but the average cost it cost the bank was $50,000 to $60,000 to hold an REO, because they have a lot of legal stuff on the back end that they're paying attorneys to clean up. And make sure, like clean up the title, clean up the deeds, make sure that they own the property in order to relist it. Gina, would you say that seems about accurate, about $50,000 to $60,000 for REOs here? Or you think it's more?
It is, but as we started to do more and more, especially short sales, and we would find out, why is the bank holding that asset? It doesn't make sense. They're getting top dollar. Why aren't they taking the offer? I checked with some people on the mainland, and the banks actually were getting paid by the government in some instances to, show their losses. So it depended on the quarter that they were in. Was it the end of the month, end of the quarter? Did they need to show the loss, not show the loss? So there was some of that behind the scenes going on as to why they would release or not release properties as well.
Yeah, we saw that too. It was a big challenge. And we didn't understand it until all of that information came out, that it was like, oh, well, that's when it hits their books, and they need it's before second quarter releasings of their earnings, right? So the more you were involved in this on a deep level, the more you started seeing there's a whole other mess, like it's a black hole of mess that was going into it. But it was interesting to deal with at the time because it was constantly evolving. So what the asset managers are actually looking for, like you have to be their eyes and ears, as we've mentioned, need for speed, making sure you have strong marketing, and you're always getting watched and audited. And with the listing agents, your working environment is not going to be pretty. Like we've said, long hours, always on the go, high demand of things. You have the carrying costs that you have to make sure that you have your accounting stuff in alignment. You have lower commission, so you have a profit margin squeeze. Your special skills really demand you to have systems and models. You had to be very strong in your systems and models, and you had to have a team around you. I never met an REO agent that was doing it solo. You had to have a group of people around you. I know on our team, we had our accountant was also our admin in our TM. And then we had an operations specialist that was out taking pictures of properties. He was double checking all of the properties on a weekly basis, taking photos, making sure they were in good condition. And we had the main listing agent. He was the one that was contacting the banks and making sure he's communicating with them on a regular basis. And then I was the buyer's agent. So we had a whole group that we were all working together, and we met every single week to stay up to date of what was getting ready to hit the market. One of the other things is from the listing agents, and I don't know if you ever got into this, Gina, but was the ability to purchase properties, like to see what was coming on as far as a good deal and start becoming an investor. And I think that was a big key that it seemed like a handful of agents did overlook, but there were another handful of agents that took full advantage of it. And then they actually stopped listing the bank-owned property and started their own investment companies instead. Did you guys see anything like that here on Hawaii?
We did. There were at least 2 to 3 agents that are top of my mind that I know did that and were very successful.
Yeah, I mean, it's very lucrative, especially in hot markets, if you can get it for the right price, like if you were getting it on the auction steps, right? And you knew what you were doing.
You had to have the turnover time. The time had to be short for the turnover. You had to have a crew that would come in and totally, one agent in particular, he had the same crew. You could always tell it was his listing coming out because it was the same house color, same interior.
Yeah, we had a hand full of those too. It was the same tile, same color schemes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I know who did this house.
Yeah. The main thing with any type of listing agent or short sale situation is always to seek help from others. And again, as we've mentioned, making sure you're talking to people that have gone before you. So getting a mentor, especially if you want to get into this, co-listing or working with someone that already has this process and system. It's a huge wormhole of mess for you to figure out on your own. So definitely seeking help from others. As far as the buyer agent mindsets and the buyers, getting a good buyer, and really what we're looking for is getting the good buyer agent to help, to be a team player, right? With like the goal is to get to the finish line of the closing, right? Not to be argumentative. Just follow the instructions I have on the MLS, get the offer in, making sure you're educating your clients on what the process is so we can get the deal done, right? And then in your course handout on page 67, there is a questionnaire. Again, is this section of REO, is it for you? Is this a good fit? So take time and make sure that you're filling that out, because there are a lot of different layers to it. Now on to lead generation. So how to get REO properties. So definitely networking and broker price opinions. BPOs is one of the best way. Gina, how did you get your REO business going?
Through both of those channels, and there are, well, I don't know if they have them still, but they did have networking conventions. You could actually go to a conference on the mainland and you could participate. I know some of the top REO agents on Maui definitely did those conferences.
Yes.
With those
going to those conferences and making those connections, and that's how you were able to get into that business. Yeah, so making sure that you have a process for that. So you can always try to reach out to the big lenders, small lenders, any asset managers you have. And this doesn't say anything, but I know for myself, LinkedIn was a big one. You could always search on LinkedIn who the asset managers for the companies were. The conferences were held by a variety of large companies, and maybe Gina, you can look up I remember they always had them. I didn't ever attend one of them. My partner did, but Gina, maybe you can look up, because we're getting asked who that is, and we could always get it out to you guys later. Any investors, HUD, do you guys have a lot of HUD homes here?
Not too many, no.
Okay, yeah, HUD was big on the mainland. I know.
Have to get certified for HUD.
That was a delightful experience. And then any Fannie or Freddie owned properties for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So as we've mentioned, getting on the internet, LinkedIn was always a good source for me, getting on blogs, making sure you have an effective resume. They're going to want to know your hardcore skill sets. They're not looking for fluff. They're looking for results, right? Making sure that you are financial capable. So if you have, again, your reserves that you're able to use, because you'll have to be coming out of pocket to make sure you're repairing the properties ahead of time. As far as making sure you have the proper insurance coverage. And also, I know in Nevada, we had to be bonded. And just really going at it. Like if you really want to do this, you just keep on until you get the relationships. And then once you build one relationship, you can move on to the next. Or I know that another one of further in my career, when we were later into the distressed property, he was a really big Fannie Mae agent, and he was huge in Southern California. They actually approached him to become, because they didn't like how some of the Fannie Mae agents were in Las Vegas. They had him come to Vegas, and he got his license with our brokerage, and he was one of the biggest Fannie Mae listing agents in the area. So it's like, once you kind of get your foot in the door, and as long as you do what they're asking you to do and have excellent performance, like they'll keep giving you listings. So making sure that you're on the ball to continue to build your business that way.
Now, sorry, I have to jump in. My chat isn't working. It's not showing me what I'm typing, so I sent in a mess on the chat. But it's 5-star was the big one. REO Mac was another one. I went to conferences that were general conferences that always had breakouts about REO and foreclosure, and I made sure I attended those. And you would have some of the top level asset managers at those conferences as well. So you don't have to necessarily go to a 5-star or be 5-star certified. You can go to a regular NAR, or I particularly went to ARIA and met with those folks at the conferences there.
Yeah, my old broker, right? That's when you met him. Michelle's asking, who do you search? Maybe where do you search for these asset managers? I know in LinkedIn, I just type in asset manager, and then all the bank asset managers pop up. So that was one way that I did it. Or you can search Wells Fargo asset manager, get creative in your searching to see what you might come up with to approach them if they have properties that are on Maui or whatever island that you're on that you would want to help with.
I think you should first have ResNet and Equator accounts for sure.
Yeah.
And then when you're approaching these asset managers, because if they want to hand you the work right away, you have to have your systems in place ready to go.
Yeah.
And then also sign up. You have to be a registered realtor with like Wells Fargo and some of the major banks would only hire 3 to 5 agents per, Maui, for example.
Area,
So
yeah.
It doesn't, you might want to be a Wells Fargo, but you're not going to be because those slots were already taken.
Yeah.
But then watch your market. If any of those agents that were maybe in the past are no longer doing real estate, that might be a good time to apply to that Wells Fargo site.
Yeah, or you could always team up with those agents if you really wanted to learn from them and make sure that you have a lot of conversations about what that would look like. Another one of the things that they did mention is making sure you have affiliations and certifications. But I love what Gina said, make sure you have like your equator, like all of your online stuff set up so then you can hit the ground running in the opportunity as it presents itself. So making sure, again, you're working with a mentor, if you can connect with a mentor. So as Gina said, researching maybe who's already here, create a mastermind around things, see what other agents are doing. And the best time to do all of this, guys, is when we're not in a distressed market. So we're probably not going to be seeing, again, the REO market hit because we have so much equity, or maybe short sales hit for at least a little bit. But doing this type of work now, like kind of get your foot in the door and do the research now, because, who is it that says, who's that old guy that's uber rich with the white hair? Buffett, Warren Buffett. When the masses do something, you're late to the party, right, guys? So you need to start, you do it when not everybody else is doing it, right? And so making sure that you have your systems in place, and really with the designations and certifications, in most that I've taken, part of the education is they share with you their systems. So if you get a designation or certification in an REO market or short sale certification, you can get their systems to make sure that you plug them in and start using it. Elite REO Network was another resource that I researched that I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys. That might be the Keller Williams REO Network that they have. Ask your brokers, or if you're in a market center, ask your team leader on any advice they would have, or anybody in your office that's specializing in that. But have a lot of different feelers out there so you can kind of expand your ability to move forward in this. So on pages 83 and 84, this is kind of that next step of the REO process, if that would work for you, if the BPOs and creating a team and all of that might work for you. So with BPOs, again, this is going to be the broker price opinion. So this is you going by, it might be a drive-by, but it's usually an easier way to go about and get a valuation on a property. And I think they used to pay us about $200 for a BPO. With Gina, what did they compensate you guys here?
Well, typically the range was between $35 to $50 on average, and then you could push it up to $80 to $100, and maybe for an interior.
Okay, so you barely get gas paid for to go do it.
Correct. That's why a lot of the agents, I think, didn't want to get into REO through that BPO route. But if you weren't doing a lot of business at the time, and you could knock out 10 BPOs a week, which would be a lot, and you could make a little bit of money, a little bit of side money to get by.
Yeah, a little compensation there. And really the BPO work is kind of the grunt work to start building the rapport with the lenders. So 10 tips for doing an effective BPO, making sure you have the format that your lender wants with all of the information, speed and accuracy. Either if they want the drive-by or the interior as well. Photos with a timestamp were really important. We had a little camera. You guys remember the little cameras with the little like orange date at the bottom? That's what we ended up having. Making sure that you have different valuations based on repair, based on a quick sale, based on an as-is sale. And then making sure you're justifying any adjustments in your comps, and having like a price spread. So I don't know about you guys here. When we used to do BPOs, we did 10% of the square footage, higher and lower. We kind of did like a half mile out, and then sales the last like 90 days. Did you guys have like similar criteria when you guys were running BPOs?
Usually the company that was issuing you the order would state what the standards would have to be.
What they would want, the criteria.
Very frustrating, especially when you were trying to do rural on Maui.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. That's that would be interesting. That'd be an interesting process here.
And there weren't enough comps to go around. Those were the days.
So again, your opinion is going to matter with all of this stuff, but making sure that you update them as time goes on. So even if you've got the listing, they might request a new BPO if the listing is sitting. So as Gina just mentioned, making sure you know the criteria, and in making sure that if you were including distressed properties in the comps that you're sending over as well, because I know Wells Fargo would not want an equity sale. We did not include any equity sales in our BPOs that we sent over. As far as making sure you get that noticed and you're working with all of the team to get those things turned over as soon as possible, and making sure that you have the volume to do. This says hundreds of them, and that's kind of what we were seeing in Vegas. Like, it wasn't uncommon for us to do at least 50 BPOs in 1 week. But that's where we had our process and system, and that's where we had everybody on the team. I mean, those were the days that we worked double time and got paid half. I mean, that was really the market of the moment at that point. But it could be profitable. Really, the income we had coming in was just to pay gas at the time. We weren't making a living off BPOs. You could also learn from appraisers or other agents that had done BPOs in the past. So again, maybe a mentor, or having conversations with appraisers on how they do BPOs. I know one appraiser, I would pay him for a drive-by appraisal or somewhat of a BPO like that, so I could submit to banks if needed as well, but always having those relationships that you can get that feedback. So the next step, again, it's a reality check for you if this part of the business actually would work for you and your ongoing business. So the actual REO listing and selling process. So there's 3 main phases. We have the pre-listing phase, the listing and marketing phase, offers, negotiation, and closing. So the pre-listing phase would look something along the lines of, once that thing hits, you're responding quickly to the asset manager. You're going out to the property, you're inspecting it, seeing what the condition is, seeing if there's people still in it, because oftentimes the house had foreclosed and the owners were still on the property. Or I don't know if you guys had this problem, but we had squatters all over the place. So as soon as they saw homes were vacant, we had other people that just moved in and made it their own. And that was a whole other mess to try to get them to vacate the property. One of the big things is making sure that we secured the property, that we made sure it was locked up and nobody can get in it. So locksmiths were really important. They would come out immediately and switch out all the keys, having our lock boxes on it, an electronic and then a mechanical for all the contractors that were coming out. Make sure we had all of the utilities. Do your utilities here, will they lien the property if you don't pay your utilities?
Never had them do that, no.
Okay, awesome. In Vegas, they lien the property. If you don't pay your trash and your sewage, they would actually lien your property.
We would cut it off, but we always had to pay the bill. We had to pay the utilities as part of getting the listing.
Yeah.
And the only time that differed, if they pulled a water meter and it was like 8,000, I think at the time, now it's up to like 12,000 to reinstall the water meter, then we would go to the asset manager and say, hey, we can't pay for this reinstallation of the water meter. If you want it back in, you have to authorize, payment directly. And they would do that.
Yeah,
but,
awesome.
Typically, they would not do anything other than cut off utilities, but we never had that done because we always just paid.
Yeah.
And even if it meant paying back bills, sometimes we had to pay, if tenants moved out and then no one was there and we didn't get the listing for a month after, but things were still left running, we had to pay that back bill, even though we didn't have the listing at that time.
Right, you have to make sure everything was current. Yeah, and then as we've mentioned before, making sure that the clean out is done, all the repairs are done based off your recommendations. Working with the occupants, that cash for keys piece, and making sure that they leave the property or any evictions that needed to take place. As far as the listing and marketing phase, having your process and your system in place to have all the language requirements. So if you're asking for addendums, and as Gina mentioned, the timelines that you might need, make sure that you have all the appropriate addendums in alignment with HER and or what your broker is requiring and or the bank's requiring, advertising it, doing open houses, always monitoring it and reporting back to the bank. And one of the tips that they have here is making sure you're marketing yourself too, right? Because your sign's going everywhere. And I know that's why we, on our REO team, I was the buyer's agent, because my partner's sign was everywhere and we just captured the number and then I followed up with all the buyers. So making sure that we're niching ourselves out as the professionals with this opportunity. With phase 3 of offer negotiation and closings, communicating, and really teaching the other agents of what would be required during the time to make sure things are moving along to closing. Definitely coaching on how to submit an offer, making sure you have pre-qualification for all the buyers, because it looks poorly upon you if people are canceling the deals. And responding to all offers in a good time. Handling multiple offers, making sure you have highest and best, suggesting how to write a clean offer so you don't have to really counter anything back, making sure you're following all the local MLS rules, and yeah, you also making sure that you're the resource for price and value. You probably know the value of that property better than anyone else. And I don't know about you, Gina, but whenever it went into contingent status or impending status, we actually removed it from the MLS. The appraisers didn't get access to it unless they contacted our team, because we would remove the lock boxes and we didn't want anyone to gain access to the property unless they had our okay or us knowing about it. And then we would actually go meet the appraisers and provide them a copy of comps to make sure that we bulletproof the transaction. Did you guys do anything similar to that?
We're not allowed to take it off the MLS. We have to make it pending, either pending do not show or pending continue to show.
Oh no, we would have it still on the MLS. I'm sorry, we would have it pending, but we would say there's no lockbox on the property. So we would kind of take it away from the MLS that it looked like.
Typically not. Typically the lockbox stayed out there because they were typically put on by the asset manager's trash out company. And they had the trash out companies going at different times without notification to us to make sure the property was secured and or in the same condition and so forth. So we didn't have the authorization to remove the lockboxes.
Yeah, well, we just removed the electronic lockbox the appraisers would use because we didn't want the appraiser to go out there. We wanted to make sure we provided them with comps.
Most of the agents at the time here, we didn't even have the central lock automatic ones. They were all.
Oh, yeah, you guys still don't have something. Yeah. You guys don't do a lot of that. People like show up to show properties here, which I find.
So here, that wasn't as much of an issue of anybody gaining access without calling you first.
Good. As far as any type of closing issues, as we've mentioned, if the asset manager is not local, it could add delays. Any liens, making sure they're all satisfied through title, making sure all HOA stuff was paid. And there may have been approval delays because of the HUD, as Gina mentioned. You guys needed it 3 days prior to closing. So I could see where there might be a day or two delay on that. So lots of different processes through that. On page 102, you have another reality check if this is a good part for your business. Now, as far as, let's see, we're going to rock and roll. We're actually going to skip this section. And you guys want to share any ahas from the REO section? Any insights or questions you guys might have before we move on to short sales? Okie doke, we'll move on to short sales. So with short sales, we're now on the distressed property timeline over in this area. So this is pre the foreclosure, and this is going to be triggered by, again, them missing some mortgage payments. And so as far as a short sale, this is going to be, they're underwater and they got to sell, and the bank has to accept an amount less than what is owed on the property, right? So it's actually a very proactive step in the process. And I think that's why I got more into the short sale side. The more I saw the REO side and how it's very robotic, and not to mention Las Vegas, 90% of the homes were underwater. And I felt like that was the best thing I could do to help my community out and all my friends and family members that they had challenges with this. That's why I got into the short sale arena. And the biggest thing that I learned with short sales is you have to manage expectations. We already manage expectations with all of our clients, right? But in short sales, you for sure have to manage your expectations. So again, getting into it, making sure it was a proactive step, because I saw too many people walking away from their houses prematurely, not working with banks, and thinking because they walked away that they were done with it. Guess what? They weren't. The bank didn't foreclose for years after that. So I had people that had left their house 3 years previously that came to me like, oh yeah, no, I think I can get through FHA, I can get another loan. I'm like, you still own this property. There's no way. Like, short sale is really an ability to take your power back to help that foreclosure process move along more smoothly and to be more empowered through this process instead of feeling ashamed during this process. That was the big thing that I taught my clients. But making sure that there's a progression to help. And so why a short sale? And really the short sale is a written negotiation settlement and agreed to with terms. And a foreclosure is taking back the property with no terms and no settlement. So they were a little bit more empowered through the short sale process. They would have the owners that, they couldn't make their payments. At least they could say yes or no, this is going to work. And they had more control over the timeline of things. So when a short sale gets accomplished, it's protecting the consumers quite a bit. The banks avoid the REOs. So they like that, and that was that $50,000 to $60,000 bill that they would get. The lender's cost gets reduced because of that $50,000 to $60,000 bill they would get with the REO. And it's a really good business building opportunity for agents because we can proactively go after our spheres. These are the people, if they're not able to make their payments and they're upside down, we have direct access to them. As we've mentioned with the REOs, it seems like you kind of like have to navigate a little bit through it in order to get more of that business. So this is kind of the path of least resistance, it seems like, to business in a distressed market. As far as the specific benefits for the seller, the foreclosure does not follow them. There's not as huge of a negative impact for a short sale than there is for foreclosure. You can start rebuilding your credit sooner in order to get government issued loans like an FHA. Possibility of deficiency judgments can go away if it's negotiated correctly. You don't have to get a lot of the negative like credit checks that some employers would need. Some of my clients actually, they were high up in the government and they had certain security clearances. And so they needed a short sale instead of foreclose to keep their security clearances and making sure that they didn't damage their ability to stay employed or get employed and moved up the chain within the government. And it actually reduces lower tax liability than a foreclosure. So one of the other things that Gina and I were discussing yesterday is that a lot of this stuff was written a couple years ago, and Gina shared with me yesterday that some of the new short sale requirements are different. Like it only impacts their credit. Gina, what did you say about a year? A year or two, it will impact their credit?
It can be much less timeline than previously. And also there's new short sale guidelines that certain banks that took certain government monies have to participate in. They have to give an answer in 10 days. There's a lot of changes since I was involved in short sales. I did 100 short sales on Maui, so quite a bit. There's been a lot of changes. So timeline of credit worthiness certainly is the biggest thing that's changed for these people that have gone through this.
Yeah, awesome. So that's good insight and also good stuff to research. So if you do have anybody that might be getting themselves into a short sale situation here, to make sure that you're researching ahead of time so you have that information. So really a short sale is a win-win for everyone. It's relief for the homeowners, a pretty big bargain for the buyers. It reduces the lender's liability. And then as far as agents, we get to help our clients, right? So the big difference is far as the short sale is that the pricing is that there's a BPO or an appraisal that usually sets the pricing for the valuation. So we can list the property at whatever amount as the listing agents on short sales, but the bank will come by and justify it by usually a BPO before they approve the short sale and or an appraisal. And that's where I mentioned before, I had relationships with appraisers that I would just go out and pay them, because from the bank's perspective, because again, you're still working with an asset manager with a short sale. From the bank's perspective, they just need to cover their own butts. They need to cover their basis and have documentation in place. So if they're going to reduce the price or take a lower amount on this, they have to have it all documented. I was told for insurance purposes, because they were getting repaid for a lot of the stuff that they were selling, right, by the mortgage insurance. But we had to have everything in writing by like a professional. So the appraisers were the professionals we went to, but making sure that there was a BPO or an appraisal that was dictating to them the amount. And again, it was third party that was giving them the amount, the pricing or the valuation. For the marketing, the listing agent is handling the short sale marketing. The contract, we have the contract through the MLS or through the local board. And then you guys have a short sale addendum here, correct, Gina?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so you would get your contract signed and then the short sale addendum and any other verbiage that your broker would suggest putting in there. And then you would end up submitting it all online. Gina and I were talking about back in the day, we had faxes. We had like 200-page faxes that we had to send. And it was pretty classic for the asset manager or the processors, because there were the processors first that we were dealing with. They would say, you're missing 2 pages, and you would have to refax the whole dang thing. It was delightful. I think we might have just dated ourselves.
Number every page and put the loan number, which loan numbers could be like 16 digits long, on every page. Top right. If it was on the left, they would reject it and send it back.
Yep, no, that's what we did. We actually scanned everything in, and then I had an e-fax, but I got really good at Adobe at that time, because Adobe PDF, because that's where we had to paste all of those loan numbers in with all the different page numbers to make sure everything went in. So that was a super exciting time. Definitely wasn't, but that was just what you had to do to help, right? So the seller gets to accept the offer, but it's contingent on the bank's approval. And then with closing, we always, things could get postponed because the bank always had to approve the final HUD. So the seller and buyer would sign off on stuff, and then we would make sure we had to get HUD approval. And then once we had all the HUD approval, then we could record. Was that a similar process that you guys had here, Gina?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So again, they're just plain different as far as the reasons that we discussed. With the end-to-end short sale agent, you're handling the lead generation, the negotiation, and the closings. Now, you could have a negotiator or processor in place. And if you're going to have that, you could have another agent or maybe an admin or a third party. But really making sure that you get a lot of your business through the referrals of your sphere of influence. So like we've said, it kind of takes the power back that you have a little bit more control over it rather than an REO agent waiting for the business to hit you. So if you do choose a negotiation or third-party servicer for short sales, you want to make sure that you know their total cost and their fee structure, what their success rate is. If they only are successful at 50% of the short sales they're processing, maybe that's not the right company for you. Maybe you need to research another one. But again, you get them from accurate sources. So even any other short sale agents that have used negotiation service firms, and get the details. Make sure that they're qualified. Because again, guys, we're the fiduciary to the client, right? So we're talking to the clients, giving them the advice. And really that's after they've talked to their attorneys, financial advisors, CPAs, all of that. But we need to make sure that if we have someone on our team, they're really qualified and we're not just handing it over and just waiting for them to do all the hard work. Like we have to stay on top of it too. But having a third-party negotiation fee or a servicer could help, because it could help offset some of the things that you have as far as the pressure and all the work that you need to do. So the criteria for the short sale, you have to have a hardship. I never got a bank approval on just someone being upside down on a house. Always had to have a hardship. So we're actually disqualifying them from their loan. That's all the same stuff that they had to do to usually qualify for their loan. Now we're providing a lot of the same stuff, but instead of them now being excited because they're going to get keys to their home, so they don't mind providing another month's worth of bank statements, now it's a matter of like, oh, okay, guys, wait a minute. Like now I have to disqualify. So now I'm bummed out. I know I got to leave. I'm scared. I'm upset. I know my clients, most of them really, they showed all of the signs of grief. So they went from like the denial to the anger. Oftentimes we turn into therapists rather than agents. Like we have to wear many different hats, but making sure that we're educating them on, you're disqualifying yourself from this loan. And I know part of my managing expectations, I would tell them, we just have one rule of thumb. And I used to kid around, like, you know how like in Fight Club, they said that, you know, what was the rule? Like, there is no Fight Club, there is no Fight Club, whatever the rule was. I always used to kid around. The banks don't make sense, the banks don't make sense, and the banks don't make sense. So as long as you understand the banks don't make sense, it's going to be a lot easier for you to get through this process. So when I ask you something, you're going to be like, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, we know that. As long as you have that expectation going through it, and this could take 90 days, it could take 1 year from now, as long as you're emotionally vested and you know that you have to continue this. And we did a really good, don't talk about Fight Club. Yes, that's it. Don't talk about Fight Club. Those were the rules of Fight Club. But it was the same thing, that just managing those expectations, that they knew that. And we did a lot of like the why, like really I would do like a financial, part of my degree is in finance. And so I would actually sit down with them and go over their financial statements and look at it and be like, guys, we're in the red. We've been in a red a long time. So we would dig down into why, and we would explore all other options first. But because by the time they got into a short sale, they had to be certain, because I'm not in the habit of working for charity. I don't work for free, and I only work to get paid on short sales when we're successful, right? So managing those expectations up front. So with the homeowner criteria, making sure that, again, they're vested with you. You're a team. You've got to move through this together. Everything has to be documented. The loan usually had to be in default. I don't think maybe it was 1 or 2 cases where we had a current loan, but I think they had to stay current because their job required it. If they got behind, and because she worked for Bank of America, her job would be at risk. Always they have to be upside down and a negative cash flow, which really wasn't a problem for most of the people I was working with. And they have to be able to cooperate. The clients have to be willing to cooperate from beginning or end. Otherwise, if they walk away, it's just a hot mess for everyone. So
can I add something, address something as far as the being upside down or being in default, well, not upside down, but default with their loan. Yeah. And what we saw with people not being able, hang on, let me add my camera, that might be helpful. With people who, I mean, maybe you can speak to this. I think one of the challenges that we ran into was that people were not in default, and then they were limited in terms of the ability to negotiate with the lender, whether it be on a modification, or what we're talking about where if they were upside down, it was a short sale or pre-foreclosure. And we have to be very careful. And I want to make sure we don't get into this trap again as agents where A, we're even giving financial advice, and B, because clients will start asking you, should I default on my loan, right? Yeah. People were making decisions about defaulting just so that their lender would work with them. And I trust that that is exactly not going to happen again based on what happened the last cycle and the regulations now. However, it could happen. So you do not want to ever advise, first of all, have them talk to a real estate attorney, and never advise that they want to default, because what would happen is they would default, right? And then they would reach a point where now they had to cure the entire default in one lump sum, and they couldn't do it. And then what would happen is if they were trying to play the game, it would actually put them in a worse financial position, whereas they could have potentially kept their home if that was their plan. And now, now they had to sell. So, or file for bankruptcy. So it's a big deal. And I just want to stress the importance of that slippery slope that we saw last time.
Yeah, absolutely. They're never, ever give advice on what they should be doing as far as making their mortgage payment. Most of the people I was working with, they already were defaulted and couldn't make their mortgage payment. But that was where my advice was usually the first step of, let's talk to an attorney. And we would do a conference call. I had a good relationship with a handful of attorneys, and they would do free consultations, and the attorneys would kind of talk them through some stuff, but there was never, we can't give advice like, yeah, don't make your mortgage payment. Like, I mean, I'm sure in Vegas there were a lot of people that said that, a lot of agents that said that. There's probably a lot of.
And that's a great point about the attorney. I love that idea where maybe now's a time to reach out to some real estate attorneys and partner with them and say, look, I would love to. I mean, obviously we have to be careful about who we recommend, but we could say this is somebody our clients have worked with, or I can set up this free consultation with you and this real estate attorney who you can decide if they're willing to do that. I think that's a great value that an attorney can provide to help people.
Yeah, with any distressed properties, I would suggest you guys have a team together, right? So you need a good CPA and a handful. I know for me, I always recommend at least 3 attorneys, financial advisors. Like, you need a group. Like, it really takes a team effort on this. And we had a handful of lenders too, because in some cases, maybe they were living paycheck to paycheck, and they could figure out if they had a little bit of equity, they could refi. And I mean, that might be a situation now, guys, that people can actually refi just a little bit, not tap out their equity, but you don't have to be the bearer of all answers with this. And I think that's, again, going back to like, we got to consult the right people to give the right advice. I always looked at it, if I were in this situation, how would I want someone to give me advice? And I'm in this business, right? So that's really the practice that I had, that I was reaching out and suggesting to people to get a hold of the professionals that they needed to hear advice from, because I'm not here to tell people any of that. And it's always funny because there were clients that I would do consultations with, and I do a free consultation, and they strategically wanted to default. I'll never forget, I had a woman tell me she had $500,000 hidden in a bank account and she wanted to short sell her house. And I politely excused myself from the appointment and walked into my manager's office. And I said, well, this is a new one. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to politely end this meeting real quick. And I did, because I was just like, wow, like there is some crazy stuff going on in this market. And that's not for me, because that would be considered fraud, right? And I enjoy having a real estate license and a real estate career at this point. And so back to why someone might not want to short sell, because again, we want to explore all options. We want to make sure that they're getting their best advice, because it is a very delicate situation. If people are super emotional or super in denial, it might not be the best time to short sell. Or people, a lot of people seem to be angry when I was working with them, and it was like, you know what, like explore your options. And that's where I would send them my reference sheet and be like, you know what, here's the people I suggest. And I'd stay in touch with them. But some people, they're stubborn and they need to figure it out for themselves, and do some more research. And if people, and another thing that Gina and I talked about yesterday, if people are super in debt and maybe their best option may be a bankruptcy, and again, that's not for us to suggest to them, but if we're looking at some things, we might want to say, hey, well, let's talk to an attorney, maybe a real estate attorney, maybe a bankruptcy attorney, whoever's the authorized person to tell someone like, hey, this might be the better option for you because you are like up to your ears in debt and you're not going to be able to get out of this. That might be a reason to not short sell. right? And then,
Jump in, the reason why it's important they talk to an attorney, and I would never take a short sale unless they spoke to an attorney or a CPA. Amen. They had to do it. If they didn't do it, I wouldn't work with them. But if you have a debt and you have credit card debt, you have automobile debt, and you have a house debt, too many agents were really quick to run out and say, well, let me just do your short sale. And then, you know, all is well. Well, these people were underwater in a lot of different ways. And if their credit card debt and their automobile debt didn't amount to enough to get the bankruptcy, by listing and selling their house, you just took that opportunity away from them. So it's super, super critical. They might need that asset of that house in order to qualify for that bankruptcy, and that would have been the better option. So you're not the expert. You have to refer to the experts. Amen on that.
yeah. Amen, sister. So here's a question for you guys. So in the state of Nevada, once they declared bankruptcy, they still had to short sell their house, but it was an easier short sell because they no longer like had that note, right? Did you guys experience that?
It might come back after the bankruptcy. You might get that short sale back.
Yeah, that's how I got a lot of my business, because I had good relationships with bankruptcy attorneys. And so once they filed BK, I would take on the short sales. And those were easier short sales to handle because the bank had already, the debt was already gone, right? But those are definitely things where might be a reason for, like, if they came into your office and was talking to you, you don't do that part of it. You refer them to the attorney so they can explore those options. But I love what Gina pointed out. If you do a short sale and they haven't done their due diligence on, you know, maybe they do need to file bankruptcy, you just took that away from them. And that's, we need to make sure we're looking out for their best interests, right? So for some of the personal reasons, they just might have their head in the sand. They might not understand the benefits. I know back in the day, I was debunking myths about the news and all kinds of not accurate information. And a lot of people just didn't know their options. As far as the criteria for the short sale, a lot of people, just because they were upside down in their value, so as values decreased and whatever the cost of sales were, they just knew it was going to take years to get that value back. And so that was kind of one of the things where they were just like, you know, a lot of people seemed defeated and they were just like, I'm out. Like, yeah, I'm already pushing the threshold of not being able to pay my bills. And they just, you know, they stopped paying their mortgage payment because they saw something along these lines. And again, those things, those were making choices before they even came to me. But those were some of the things that we were facing. As far as positive and negative alternatives to short sales. So some of the positive things is that they would have a forbearance. They might have a right of redemption if they were able to get the cash back. I love that here in Hawaii, you guys can go and actually get the houses back through that kind of that redemption period. And then even having some type of option for a loan modification, right? Did you guys have a lot of clients that actually had successful loan modifications?
They could do one or the other. They couldn't do two tracks at the same time. So sometimes we would have them go down the modification route if their intent really was to save their home, but we would roll the short sale along with it. But there would become a time where they would have to choose one or the other.
Yeah, we did. There was that time you had to do the loan mod first, and then they got denied for the loan mod, and then you can go proceed with the short sale. But it was the same paperwork, right? It was pretty much the same process.
Pretty much the same information they had to fill out, but they didn't have to try for a loan mod first. Sometimes the banks would offer deed in lieu, of course. You know, and
option.
Yeah, clients were happy for that. Of course, it didn't make us the money, but you know, it got them out more quickly.
Yeah.
So.
And again, that's just the seller signing over the deed back to the bank, right? But there's still, usually with the deed in lieu, they would kind of give them, it would help with the deficiency judgment in that way. But that was the big thing that we were looking at, is these big numbers of the deficiency judgments, of the difference of what they owed and then what their tax liability was going to be on that. And this was even before the government stepped in and had the Debt Forgiveness Act. So our role, again, as we've talked about, advisor, being a fiduciary, managing the expectations of the sellers, and helping them through that process. And then making sure they know all of their opinions or their options, acting in their best interest, helping them protect against fraud. I don't know if you guys experienced, but there were a lot of fraudulent companies that just, we're going to help you out, give us $1,000, and they never did anything. Vegas was victim of that quite a bit. And then making sure that there was an arm's length transaction. The banks wanted to make sure if they were short selling something, they weren't short selling the house back to the cousin that was then going to rent back. And so there was a lot of paperwork to sign off to make sure it was arm's length and no funny business was going on.
Yeah, we had one where the bank, Wells Fargo, actually approved non-arm's length because the house was in such poor condition. It was literally falling down on its ear. They wanted to get rid of the asset more than they cared about the arm's length, but that was only one.
Yeah. So again, making sure they know their options. As far as mindsets, we've already discussed that. The consumer is going to have a lot of stress and anxiety. So you're going to, again, have to help calm them down and give them information and options. They're probably going to be desperate. The buyer is going to be seeking a deal, which buyers always do, right? But in these types of markets, it's even worse. Lenders are overburdened with properties. So any short sale processors, they get paid like $10 an hour, and you're trying to talk to someone and make sense to someone that's getting paid $10 an hour, and they're usually not very helpful and not very happy at all. So making sure you have your stuff together and your mindset right so you can work with them. And then making sure that the other agents are informed. So like if you have an offer that came in on a short sale, you communicated effectively with the agent that, hey, we're in this for at least 90 days. Like, you know, and we had earnest money deposited, and the earnest money was non-refundable within the first 90 days if the buyer wanted to back out. But that gave us at least time to short sell the process, get the short sale process going on, so buyers weren't bailing, because that was definitely going to be a challenge. Because sometimes we would just proceed with the short sale because we just wanted to hear back from the bank what they were going to approve, if they were going to approve it or not. So with the sellers, we've talked about making sure that they understand the scope of the credit impact and making sure that they have a future after this. That was a big message I had. Like, this is just a chapter, guys. You have to plan your life after this, especially if you have a family. Like, this isn't the end of the world. With lenders, they always like to just weigh the costs. There was always a spreadsheet. They were always running the numbers. What were the numbers? And some of them, they just didn't care if it went into foreclosure because they knew their numbers. And they were usually, like I said, there was a lot of issues. We always got transferred. Gina and I were kind of cracking up yesterday. We would be processing a short sale and getting close to the approval, or we got the approval. In the middle of the approval, it got sold to another bank, which was fun. And then we had to start the process all over again. But making sure that you have your stuff together to help the clients and stay on track with the right mindset, because it can be super discouraging with stuff like that. And I think what Gina and I talked about is really got to be a bulldog. You can't take no for an answer. I know that Gina, you said you reached out to a senator, or who did you reach out to get a deal done one time?
I did. I had a veteran that they were, trying to just a couple days prior to closing say no. And so he was a wounded veteran, and I called Senator Inouye's office, and they said, well, of course we want to help you. So send us the information, and I did. And I went back to the asset manager and I said, oh, by the way, Senator Inouye's office said that they're really wanting to help this young man. So I suggest we move this along and get it closed, and they did. They did. Yeah. And then the pregnant wife one too. I had the doctors, threaten them with doctors if they injured the fetus, because the pregnant buyer was so upset. They canceled 3 days prior to closing and sold it. And then, that one was a mess as well. So. Yeah.
But you don't take no for an answer. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. And I know for me, when I sat in front of the sellers and I told them I was going to do my best, that's exactly what they were getting. And that included me waking up at like 5 a.m. every morning to meditate for like 30 minutes to like make sure my mind was right, that I would have the patience to deal with some of the people I needed to deal with. to escalate it to whoever needed to be escalated to get the approvals on these types of things.
And negotiating the liens, the secondary liens, those were sometimes the most challenging. The first lien holder would just follow the process and you'd get your approval, and then trying to negotiate the second lien holder and the deals we had to cut with those folks. It was really kind of sharky, those people. So it was very interesting. A lot of stories there too.
Yeah, everybody was just trying to get as much money as they could through that process. And when the government started handing out money, it got even worse. So again, as far as listing agents, making sure that you really are compassionate with the people that you're sitting in front of, being an advocate for them. Master of patience. Well, that was something I still work with, but I was definitely persistent, I would say. But the patience, my practice was you attract more bees with honey. And so I would always have that mindset with anybody that I talked to. This often needed to take place with HOA companies because they have certain standards of not processing stuff. I would show up with nice little bundt cakes and little cards and stuff, just smiling as much as I can and giving whoever I could, just not bribing them, but here's a gift. I don't know if you've seen my request, but maybe you could look at it sometime soon because I need it by tomorrow or the deal falls apart. And I know that making sure you have your systems, and really the short sale process is what helped me really dial in all of my systems, because I was handling, I was selling about 50 houses a year, and at any given point I had 25 escrows at a time, and probably 15 to 20 of those at one time were short sales. So you had to kind of have everything in line and doing whatever it takes. Like I said, being a bulldog. With buyer's agents, you have to teach them the process and the lender's in charge. And I would tell them the same thing. The banks don't make any sense. The banks don't make any sense, and the banks don't make any sense. As long as we understand that, no, me and my team make sense, and we're going to work our butts off to make sure this gets done. And we did. I had to help a short sale assistant that her and I were always on the phones, and we communicated. We also updated everyone every single week. The number one complaint with agents, guys, is that we don't communicate enough with our clients. So the expectation I set forward with my clients, and any buyer's agent too, is, hey guys, I'll update you guys every Thursday, Friday by the latest. You will know exactly what's going on with this file. And that's how on top of our deals we were. And me and my assistant, we would just go back and forth calling, and anything that needed to be escalated, she told me about, and I would call and get on the phone and then let everybody know. And it wasn't just, this is what happened last week. This is what we're looking for. So like, for instance, if we submitted the short sale package and we were waiting for that BPO, hey guys, called, they confirmed all the paperwork. Now our next step is we're waiting for the BPO. Hey guys, no updates this week. We're still waiting for the contact for the BPO. Hey guys, this week what I did is I escalated the file because I haven't heard about the BPO, and this is about the time I should be hearing about someone to come out to do the BPO. I've escalated it. I'll keep you guys posted on what happens. Hey guys, this next week, the BPO got done. We're waiting for the valuation. So I had this elaborate graphic, kind of like what we see with the distressed timeline through the short sale process. And I told them, here are the key points that we need to keep an eye out on. And this is what I'm going to help coach you through, that we're going to know exactly where we're at and make sure everything moves along as planned. And if we run into hiccups, just know we're going to run into hiccups. It's like taking a flight on an airplane. We're going to fly from point A to point B. We're going to have some turbulence, but I know I'm going to get you there. So that was a lot of the process I had with my clients to help manage those expectations and help keep the buyer's agents at ease too, because we didn't want them to get stressed out and bailed. So then at least they're updating the buyers and they could stay at ease, because the last thing I wanted is for them to go find another property and go buy an REO while they're in escrow with me on short sales, which that happened too in Vegas. And keeping them posted and informed through the process. So the short sale process, again, there's the pre-qualification process, the gathering and submitting the package, the negotiation, and the closing the transaction. So with that, making sure you understand your processes, streamlining your paperwork. Gina had mentioned that there are different banks have different short sale packages and requirements, and they have different processes of how to submit paperwork to them. So making sure you're up to date on that. So the 10 steps is pre-qualifying your seller, assembling your package, listing the home, obtaining an offer, submitting your package and the offer, following up, negotiating, appraisal, file approval, and then the deal closes. And so with the pre-qualification of the seller, as we've mentioned, asking a lot of questions, making sure that you understand what's going on in their world. Gina mentioned she used to go to her client's house. I used to bring clients into my office. I just told them that was just the way, because I tried it a couple times going to their house and it was too emotional. They weren't able to logically think. They were usually in tears. And I still had people crying in my office. I always had a box of tissue, but it became a little bit more of a professional setting that we could take some of the emotion out and start talking a little bit more about the reality of their situation, because it seemed like a lot of them had their head in the sand and they weren't making mortgage payments and they were just pretending like everything was okay. And that wasn't the case, right? So making sure you have all of their contact information, their personal contact information, details of their loan, what their hardship really was, any type of property information, making sure you're clear with their motivation, any liens that might be on the property or HOA, which we were doing research ahead of time because we were pulling the preliminary title report before I ever met with them in person, and coaching them on all the next steps. So making sure you're assembling the package. One of the things Gina and I had in common were that we sent them all the forms they needed to fill out prior to even having our first meeting with them. Because if they could follow those instructions, they have a better chance to help us go through the whole process. I made the error a couple times of taking on a short sale and then giving them the paperwork to fill out, and that just delayed the process. Because then they're still filling out the forms by the time I have an offer that's coming in, and you don't want that. You want all of that package all put together. They're part of the package, all put together. The only thing you have to do is then update the financial statements, like update their paycheck stubs, any taxes that might be coming in. So again, making sure all of that is together ahead of time would be my suggestion. So then you can assemble the package once you get an offer very quickly. So some of the things that might be in their package is a hardship letter, the listing agreement, authorization letter, and then if anybody else needed to be authorized, like an escrow company or whatever your processing company was, their financial statements. And some of the bank's packages, that's actually on their website, or they don't even have to fill it out on paper anymore. So just make sure with the different banks, you know who that, what their process would be. Bank statements, tax returns, the fully executed purchase contract, your short sale disclosures, buyer pre-approval letter, your estimated HUD, any CMAs or valuations of the property, and then again, the fax cover sheet, because that's really what was going on back then. We had fax cover sheets. Right? The giggling, it's like, oh man, no, those were fun days. As far as pricing and listing the home, making sure you're following all the MLS rules, providing the instructions to the agents as far as the expectations, making sure you have, I used to get approval from the sellers to say which bank it was. Like, do I have your approval to share who your lender is? Because we knew which lenders were probably better to deal with. Gina, I don't know about you, but NationStar was not a favorite of mine. Wells Fargo and Chase was actually probably my favorite. And one of the lead generation resources I had is that I talked to, in the local banks, whoever was processing the loan modifications, I went out and gave them gifts. That was kind of my way to keep getting business, because once the loan mod got denied, they needed a short sale, and the loan mod people had my contact information to pass along. But again, making sure that you have the permission from the client if you're going to disclose who their bank is. But making sure that you're doing a good CMA to justify the valuation of the number. And from the pricing perspective, now we didn't have this often. We ran these numbers in Vegas, but we didn't really know what they were going to expect because they came back with crazy numbers. But Gina shared with me that she would reverse engineer some of her transactions because she knew certain banks, they needed 80% of the value of the short sale and then they would approve it. So for instance, using this example, and this example uses 85%, but if the lender requirement was $70,000, you would just add on all the fees and the amounts, and then you would get your selling price, right? So you could kind of reverse engineer depending on the bank and the more familiar you are with the bank processes. as far as obtaining the offer, making sure that the buyers are in it to win it. If there are multiple offer situations, you can submit that. Really, I only took one offer, and then I told everyone else if it ever fell out, they could have a right for first refusal, like if someone wanted to be in secondary position. But really only submitting one offer at a time, because otherwise it will confuse the banks. And then once you submit your package, as we've mentioned before, all 240 pages gets to get faxed to the bank or uploaded to their system. And making sure the loan number is on every single page and it's prominent. You have a letter that you send to them to communicate effectively, because this package is going to change a lot of different hands throughout the process, but making sure all of that is together. Step 6, follow-up. As we've mentioned, I called the banks every single week to find out what's going on. Did they receive the paperwork? What's going on? When is the BPO going to happen? When does it get escalated to this person or change hands to that person? And making sure, we always used to run every single week, we would look to see if the notice of defaults were filed on the property. So we were keeping an eye on that, because if there was a notice of default filed or anything else filed to the deed, then we knew that we needed to kind of push things up and make sure that there were no foreclosure dates. Otherwise, we would have to get them postponed. With negotiations, negotiating that first lien holder was a big thing. Second or third lien holders were super fun, because they were usually getting $3,000, if that. Gina, what was your experience with the second and third lien holders?
It was up to 7,000. Typically 6,000 would be what they would get. But it really depended. We had, different liens. It wasn't just the second lien holder. It could be American Express that put a lien on the property. It could be medical liens on the property. There were all kinds of different negotiations that we would make. But we would always put in at least for 8 and see what we got and see if they would take it.
Yeah, we were always overestimating too and sending that out. And I know in some instances we actually got the buyers to pay off liens because
we could also have the seller pay towards the second. There was no guarantee they would get the money back. Yeah. But there was a difference. Say the second was just stuck on 5,000 and the first said only 3. They were perfectly within their rights. They owned the home. They could pay the second the money with no guarantee that it was going to all go through. But
yeah,
that could do it.
Yeah, it's always interesting how we had to get deals done, and that's where I think that
sometimes we're not allowed to pay though, depending.
Yeah, I was gonna say
we're not allowed. Yeah.
Well, I know for me, my sellers weren't allowed to pay. The first would not allow the sellers to pay, but not on the second liens. The buyers weren't allowed to pay on the second liens, but they were able to pay any personal liens or medical liens. Or I know one time there was an IRS lien that needed to be paid, and the banks allowed the buyer to pay that, so the seller could get out of it.
As long as you had the first lien holder approval, you could get it done. But sometimes getting that approval was difficult.
Yeah, I still think that it caused me to have more wrinkles than I need to at this time in my life. I don't know why I went into that realm early in my career, but definitely added a lot more stress than needed.
We were the ones doing business, so if ever,
I mean, really, it was a catalyst for a lot of things for my career, which I'm grateful. And I helped a lot of people. The people I helped then are still my clients now. And everybody knows I live in Hawaii, and I still have
buying a house, or they're referring their kids to us to buy houses. So that goodwill never went away.
Yeah, they're super grateful. And I know that anybody that I helped, usually I got 3 referrals within the first year from them. Like that was kind of my goal because of the service and expectation. And I was always looking for that 5-star experience. So really good stuff. Step 8 in the short sale process is that appraisal, and making sure that appraisal is signed and things are moving forward and the appraisal's not coming in and messing up the transaction. I always met the appraisals and the appraisers and handed them comps. Like I didn't have conversations about anything, but I always killed them with kindness. Here were the comps that why we had this. I have appealed appraisals in my 16 year career. I have never won an appeal. Gina, have you won an appeal with an appraiser?
I have.
What?
Yes.
Good for you. I've not yet have had that happen. They all seem to be right. The appraisers are right, and I'm a real estate agent. I don't know anything, so that's okay though. We figure out still to get the deals done. The last step is making sure that the file is totally approved by the lender. Making sure you're still keeping an eye on that deed. Any liens or any deficiency judgments that you need to keep an eye out for, and making sure the compensation is not adjusted, because that happens sometimes too, and being clear on who's paying what costs. The last step is the deal closes, so avoiding any type of last minute negotiation fees, or fee negotiation or disappointments or people having to come with a lot more money to closing, or yeah, like there's, you know, it's never done until it's done, right? It's never done until the title is actually transferred. So there's a lot of different things that we need to make sure that we're covering through that process to make sure it all gets finished. Now, what happens if the deal gets rejected? Well, mainly that's because the bank's not having enough money, you know, or information gets left out. It ends up going into foreclosure. That always is a possibility. I think I only had one in my career go into foreclosure. I was pretty good at getting the foreclosures postponed. I shared with Gina yesterday. I emailed pretty much everybody in Bank of America to get one postponed. It was probably my hardest short sale, but it was worth it. And because the lower people on short sales, the processors, they kind of have a chip on their shoulder, and they weren't very helpful. But one of the questions I used to ask,
you're expecting them to care.
Yeah, they don't. But
the buyer's already left their rental. They've already moved their furniture. No, we don't care.
They had a really negative mindset that every seller was hoarding a bunch of money and they were out to get them. And one of the questions I asked during that time, and I'm a high D, a high I, and a high S, and I think my D was probably higher at that time in my career, because my favorite question to ask them was, who fires you? Who do I need to talk to? And I usually didn't play that card until I was really fed up with nonsense and I knew they weren't doing their job, and I would try to escalate it and try to kill them with kindness. But my favorite question was, who fires you? Like, if someone were to fire you today, who would that person be? Because I think that's the person that might be able to help me. And usually they buttoned up real quick. And that was another reason I love LinkedIn, because I could research whoever that person was, find out their name, and through the banks, you knew exactly the formatting of their company emails, right? So it was their first name dot last name at bankofamerica.com or whatever it looked like. You do enough research and you get good at this, you can find anybody, right? You could be, I kind of kid around that we were cyber stalking a lot of people at that time, but it was kind of the truth because we needed to. We just needed to talk to the right person to help get the deal done. But as we talked about before, if the buyer walks away, making sure we're relisting it as soon as possible, because we want to get another offer in place. And making sure that in the MLS comments, I don't know if you guys had this, but making sure that we had short sale approval, like pending short sale approval. It was actually a box we had in our MLS. So lastly, we're going to get into the lead generation. So as we talked about, this is your path straight to people. Lisa said, wow, who fires you? Yeah, that was my favorite line during that time. I was high D, I would say. I wanted the result. So as far as lead generation, other agents, a lot of other agents didn't want to process short sales. So they would just refer it out to me, and I would take them all day long because I knew my stats that I was going to get referral business from that one client. Lisa's asking, should we continue a part 2? So then I'll leave this to you guys. Kind of my mindset is I'm just going to finish this last section of the short sale, and we can do a part 2 with the buyer stuff. Or if you guys feel like you got enough value of the REO and short sale stuff, you guys just let me know what you want. Because again, we were trying to fit 3 sections into 2 hours, which is definitely not happening. So you guys let me know, type in the chat box on what you would think. If we'll just finish up this short sale area and you guys think that you got enough value, or if you guys want to have a part 2 where I cover the buyer section of the distressed properties. Okay, awesome. So we have some votes for part 2. All right, so we could definitely do a part 2 if we want to Okay, awesome. Part 2. So I'm just going to finish up this little section of the lead generation of short sales, and then we can communicate, Lisa, on the best time to do part 2 if we want to just roll it over into next week, or if we want to do it in between next week's session, because next week is bulletproofing the transactions. And so for the lead generation sources, as we've talked about, database is great. I know for me, I always reach out to people and I say, who do you know that's having a problem making their mortgage payment right now? I'm very specific. I'm not asking for referrals. I'm asking for introductions. Do you have a friend, family member, or neighbor that's having a hard time making their mortgage payment? You know, I'd love to be a resource for them and help them out and give them some options. That would be the scripts or the verbiage that I would be using to help get the introductions from my sphere with the calls. And then I did a lot of blogging around that time, and I had people all around the country asking me questions about short sales around that time. So blogging was really great. Making sure that you're staying up to date with your current clients. Even my buyers that were in escrow, hey guys, do you know a friend that's having a hard time making their mortgage payment or needs more options about real estate? I'd love to be a resource for them. And making sure that you can farm, expire listings, all the normal stuff, any type of notice of default, we could mail them a package immediately. That was a path that we took for a while, getting information from the title companies on that kind of stuff. We knew if a balloon payment was coming, right? And that was the indication of them going to default, because that was a lot of the defaults that were happening in Vegas. They had a balloon payment or an adjustable rate and all of this stuff. And from there, we could time it that it was going to be 3 to 6 months after that they were going to have problems. So doing some research ahead of time to make sure that we knew who we could be marketing to directly. Any type of marketing promotions, like I said, online, we would do ads, we would hang up things all over with coffee shops. As I've mentioned, having relationships with any lenders, divorce attorneys, bankruptcy attorneys, doing classes. We always did a class, you're upside down on your mortgage and you can't make your mortgage payment. Now what? Like, what are your options? And as I mentioned, I went in and I made relationships with the people that were doing the loan mods in the banks, because that's the path. And that would be, if you guys were looking to expand your business, I'd be maybe talking to people in the bank similar to that. Like, I would be walking into the local bank with a nice little gift or something, little like cookies, something that it's like, yeah, I'm just wondering who would process your, with your mask on, who would process your loan modifications, or who helps handle the people that you guys service the loans for that can't make their mortgage payment. I'd love an opportunity to just chat with them for a couple minutes and see how we could partner. Those might be some good lead generation resources. Okay, so lastly, you just have some on your handout, on the short sale handout of the package, you can go through to see if short sales are a good option for you. Because again, it does take a lot of, it takes a lot of patience, a lot of compassion and understanding and education to make sure that you're doing the fiduciary and doing a really good job for your clients. So thanks guys. I know we went over, I apologize about that. Gina and I were like, we don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to try. So I'm glad that we're going to do a part 2. So we'll be in contact with you on when we'll have that last section. It'll probably only be about an hour long, if that, for the buyer section on how best to help buyers with distressed properties. But I appreciate you all jumping in and investing in your time, energy, and effort in this. And then Gina, any last words that you want to share with us?
No, it's really great to be on the call with all of you. And again, I congratulate all the agents for taking the time and committing to learning something new for your careers. So good job.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you
guys.
both. So good. Yeah, we'll send out an email. Thank you guys. It was so great, and look forward to the next session. So
yeah, awesome. You guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you, Christine and Gina.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Hi, Eileen.
You are some smart ladies.
Dynamic duo.